Good Labor Day. My name is David Knox, and I have multiple system atrophy. I thought it was interesting how we always read about parts of the brain, parts of the body that stop working, and yet the only way we know if they're not working is through DAT scans, MRIs, X-rays, CTs, things like that. And I was thinking, you don't necessarily have to have an X-ray or a DAT scan to tell you what part of the brain is not working anymore for you. It's really simple when you do some little research about it. For instance, the putamen. So for the record, I have multiple DAT scans that shows my putamen and my caudate nucleus is affected by MSA. The other part that I'm not sure of would be the cerebellum and the spinal cord. Those are really the four areas that are affected by MSA. Putamen and caudate in the middle of your brain up here, cerebellum in the very back, the big bump, and then your spinal cord. So what happens with MSA is that you just don't stop. These parts of the body just don't die. Okay, they don't die. That's why I tell people on my videos and podcasts, we have ups and downs. We have good days, we have bad days. What happens is these parts of the brain stop producing the dopamine. And when we stop producing the dopamine, it's harder to get signals throughout the body via the spinal cord. So that starts to affect us. There are days where we produce more dopamine than other days. So it's not like your putamen just dies and never starts working again. It's just that the radio tracer activity, right, the neural activity of that part of the brain gets less and less. Okay, so nothing technically is dying, but the nerve cells are. So I imagine once you completely after many years, you have a lot more complications, but that just means that more cells have died in your body. Not that the piece of your brain has completely died. So, the putamen is when it has degeneration of the nerve cells, it leads to less production of the dopamine, which is vital for movement control of our bodies. Which is why my speech and talking and stuff right now is very hard. Very little dopamine. But since the putamen itself isn't dead, the loss of this dopamine disrupts the ability to communicate effectively with other brain regions. So this highway system is no longer connected, at least not all the time. We start to break it up more and more. So when the putamen is disrupted, you'll see somebody typically that has slowness, like you see me, body movements, head movements. You would see them with stiffness, right? My body isn't really moving too much on camera. My neck is stiff, my shoulders are stiff, even my facial muscles are stiff. My hands are stiff. I'm not really moving them too much. And then problems with balance. So that's really what the putamen, when it starts to be disrupted with dopamine, is the slowness, the stiffness, and problems with balance. So if you have these issues, you know that even though you may not see it on a test from your doctor, you know that MSA has affected your putamen without a doubt. The caudate, which I believe surrounds the putamen, also is affected by MSA, but to a lesser extent. The putamen is really much more affected than the caudate, and the caudate nucleus, in entirety as it's called, plays a big role in motor control, in learning, and in memory. So the degeneration of these cells in the nucleus, in the caudate nucleus, you will have problems with movement, so slowness again, stiffness, but also the big one is difficulty initiating movements. I talk all the time about, I can run, but it's terribly hard to initiate the running sequence and to stop it. Right? Once I get going, I can go. I'm still gonna fall, but I can do it. But starting and stopping is what the caudate is affecting. Right? It's not really necessarily the movements itself, but initiating these things, trying to pick something up, trying to swallow, trying to put a hand on her foot in a specific area. And then also the caudate has starts to affect your cognition. So you start to have impaired thinking, planning, and decision making. So you start to hear people with MSA talk about brain fog, right? Our cognition, our intelligence, our smartness. How do we do processes? Our higher learning in our frontal cortex. These things start to deteriorate. So you can tell somebody that has a caudate nucleus impairment because they start to space out. They're not as sharp as they used to be, so to speak. And then also you see with the caudate, you see problems with mood, depression, and anxiety. And this is all because the body cannot control the proper levels of dopamine in the nucleus, in the caudate. So, it is compromised by the MSA, but you got to remember that the extent of the damage varies from person to person. Everybody at MSA has a different story about how it starts, how it ends, and everything in between, which is interesting. The third part of the brain that's affected by MSA is the cerebellum in the very back, right, at the top of your neck. And it's significantly impacted if you have MSA C type, right, cerebellar type. And this one goes a little bit different. So you'll notice some very similar symptoms, but the similarity is very minor because they are completely different. So the cerebellum is responsible for coordinating movement, balance, and posture, right? The degeneration of these nerve cells in this MSA C type in the cerebellum leads to prominent problems with, for instance, ataxia, right? Ataxia is not the same thing as slowness, right? You may think it is, but it's not. It's a loss of coordination, right? Clumsiness, which affects your walking, reaching, depth perception, and fine motor skills. Those are very different topics, very different subjects when it comes to slowness versus ataxia. They are not the same, definitely medically. You also see things such as dysarthria, which is slurred and slowed speech. Me speaking right now, this is my typical speech. It's finally caught up with me to a YouTube video to where it's very slurred and it's slow speech. That's all back here from the cerebellum. So we all start with generally one type of MSA, whether it's P, Parkinsonism, or cerebellar, MSA P or MSA C, and then we gradually get other parts of the brain affected, and we all kind of blend in. We seem like we're very similar, but we're not. So dysarthria, the slurred and slow speech. I don't need another DAT scan to tell me my cerebellum is affected. I know because you can see it, you can hear it. It's clear as day. MSA has got to that part of the brain already, right? And then also nystagmus, right? Involuntary eye movements. Had a sleep study, and my wife was like, "Man, your eyes are twitching so fast. She's never seen that before." The nystagmus test for police, right, left to right. After the finger, your eye gets to 45 degrees, your eye will twitch, and that's how a police officer knows that you're drunk under the influence of alcohol, because that's cerebellar intoxication. That's what that is. But if you have a condition like ours with MSA, you get the same effect, and they might think you're drunk when you're not. So hopefully, they would run more tests, and they would notice that you are actually disabled or handicapped and not drunk. So involuntary eye movements is something that happens with that too, on top of like double vision, blurred vision. And one of the last ones the cerebellum has is also the dysphagia, right? Difficulty swallowing. I have that as well. That's a big issue. Most of us with MSA, we die of, with the effects of dysphagia, difficulty swallowing, because we aspirate things into our lungs and not to our stomach. So, dysphagia, if you have trouble swallowing, you have the effects of MSA-C, and dysphagia does not come from the MSA-P part. So, when you start to have these, you're like, great, I have both of the types of MSA, and that, in fact, is true. So, even though there are other types of MSA, P versus C, which permanently affect movement similar to Parkinson's disease, the cerebellum can also be involved to some extent, contributing to balance problems and gait disturbances as well. So, you'll see cerebellum also affecting people with their gait and balance, but mainly gait and balance comes from MSA-P. So if you have like fine motor controls is C, but movements is P. There's a big difference. Slowness of movements and cogwheel movements is all MSA P. Fine motor skills, being able to type, MSA C. They seem like they might be the same, but they're very different. And the gait problems, like if you see somebody that's definitely stumbling and they seem like they're drunk, that's MSAC for you, right? And MSAP just makes it worse, where your legs and stuff give out. But there's one other part of the body that people don't really talk about, and that is the spinal cord. MSA just doesn't affect your brain; it also affects your spinal cord, and you don't hear it very often, but it does. But the involvement can vary. It just depends on how progressed your symptoms are, your MSA. One of the first things they're going to do for you is they're going to give MRIs of your brain and your spine. And they're not looking for MSA. They're looking for lesions, tumors, anything that can cause the symptoms you have. And then down the road, you'll start to see atrophy and ataxia and things of the shrinkages of white matter and things in your brain and spinal cord, and they can see the development, the progression of MSA. So, since MSA causes degeneration of nerve cells in various parts of the brain and spinal cord, on the spinal cord, it primarily affects, like for instance, lateral cortical spinal tracts. So, the lateral cortical spinal tracts are pathways that are responsible for voluntary, right, what we want to do, not involuntary, but voluntary muscle control. Damage to these tracts lead to weakness, stiffness, and spasticity of the limbs. So, we talk about all the time about how we try to do things with MSA. We try to be active, but we're so tired because moving our arms and legs and every part of our body is because those lateral cortical spinal tracts are being degenerated and causing muscle weakness, right? It's the way it is. It also has spinal cerebellar tracts, right? Spinal cerebellar tracts are pathways that coordinate movement and balance. So damage to this area of the spinal cerebellar tracts can contribute to ataxia and gait problems, compounding what you already have from MSAP or MSAC, right? There's one thing to lose your balance. There's another thing not to be able to coordinate. Coordination is like walking, missing your steps, trying to run, trying not to run. It just amplifies your already aggressive symptoms you have with MSAP or MSAC. And then last but least, the spinal cord is responsible for your autonomic nerves, right? Not P, not C. So you have degeneration in your spinal cord because the automatic nerves, the nerves that regulate involuntary functions like blood pressure, heart rate, breathing, digestion, blinking, things that are automatic. Damage to these can also include lead to orthostatic hypotension or POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, constipation, urinary problems, and erectile dysfunction. Right, so when you have those types of issues, MSA has progressed into your spinal cord. And of course, it can start in your spinal cord and then spread to the brain. MSA is completely different with people, but normally it starts in the brain, and we start to have a lack of dopamine, and it just cascades from there. So you don't need to have 1,000 tests or even have a $50,000 DAT scan to show you, they're probably $12,000 or $14,000 a DAT scan or PET scan or whatever to show you that you have degeneration of that part of the body. Because if you pay attention to yourself, you're able to see what part of the body or the brain or spinal cord is being affected by MSA. So do we need to actually go to the doctor and ask for another MRI for my spinal cord for my autonomic issues? No, I already know it's there because of the symptoms I have. So I thought I would just talk about this briefly for a few minutes, just to clear the air and show people that you don't always have to have every test to know everything or to know something about yourself, your body, your condition with MSA. It's there in front of you. You just got to read about it. So I appreciate you very much. Love you to death. There will be another video. On the next video I might have is about my myoclonic jerks and sleeping. It will be very interesting to watch, I promise you. Again, if you like this video, just please share. Spreading the word about MSA and awareness is everything. It means a lot to me. And thank you again for your attention. I'll see you next video. Bye-bye.